real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Nathan Romas. My guest today is Teri Bryant, the Chief Firearms Officer for the province of Alberta. A little bit about Teri. Teri was raised in rural and small town Ontario and moved to Vancouver for her graduate studies. After completing her MBA at the University of British Columbia, she worked in banking in Toronto and then returned to UBC for her doctorate in international business. In 1990, she moved to Alberta and taught business full-time at the University of Calgary for 25 years, specializing in international business and particularly business with Japan. After retiring in 2015, she escorted groups of students to Japan on travel study programs and did volunteer work. She also wrote professionally on matters of federal government policy. Service on the Alberta Firearms Advisory Committee led her to apply for the job of Alberta Chief Firearms Officer. She was appointed to that position effective September 1st of 2021 and now splits her time between Calgary and Edmonton. She also travels extensively within the province to listen to Albertans on firearms issues. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
I could say that I do know you travel a lot because I've talked to you a few times and you're back and forth between the two major cities. You were also recently at the grand opening for the new Prophet River store.
Yes.
In Lloydminster.
I was.
And how did that go?
Oh, it was great. I do a lot of outreach at gun shows, and this was a bit of a logical extension of that. So I sort of set up my tables the same way I do at a gun show, and people came up to talk to me the same way they do at a gun show. And so we had a lot of good conversations about firearms issues and people's concerns with firearms regulations. And I always have some cool stuff to look at, so also lots of interesting conversations about the cool stuff I had to look at.
Great. Well, thank you for being here today, and taking time out of your schedule. I appreciate it a lot. This meeting, I have to say, has been in the making for some time. We originally met at a call I was on at the Edmonton office, and in there, you're gracious enough to give me some time, and we kind of connected from there. I set up a meeting for you with our gang team, and unfortunately, I got sick, so I wasn't able to make that. But you still made it out. I heard you had a great conversation with our boss, and from there, this podcast idea kind of came up. So you're one of the first people I thought, hey, let's get them on the show.
Well, I'm honored to have the opportunity to connect with you and your listeners because law enforcement is one of the key constituency partners that we work a lot with, and obviously very important in maintaining public safety, which is the number one goal of our office.
Yeah. So maybe we'll kind of start at the beginning. I gave a bit of an intro on you, but I'm curious, how do you go from rural small town Ontario, from out to the coast, back to Toronto? You're doing things back and forth. You worked in banking, now you're in firearms. So what's kind of the story there?
Okay, well, when I was a kid, my father had a job that required us to move very frequently. So I went to 9 schools in my first 9 years of school. And usually we ended up living wherever it was cheap, which was out in the country somewhere where my father would live would be working in a nearby town or city. And so we lived all over sort of southern and central Ontario. That had 2 impacts, I guess. One was that my father, and before him my grandfathers, had been heavily involved in recreational use of firearms. And so practically the only thing I ever did with my dad when he was home was go to gun shows or go to the range. So that perhaps gives a little bit of insight into how I ended up with a bit of a firearms theme to my life. The other thing was that because we were moving all the time, I didn't usually have many friends, By the time I made any friends, we'd moved again. So I became sort of very bookish and spent a lot of time reading the Book of Knowledge or encyclopedias or a series called Freddie the Pig when I was very young, anything I could get my hands on, and that sort of led into my more academic pursuits.
Okay. And then once you were at UBC, you completed your MBA, and that was in finance, or?
Well, an MBA is a general business degree, so I had a bit of emphasis on international business and finance, but an MBA is intended to be general business education at a graduate level. So after I did that, then I went back to, well, actually before I even started a permanent job, part of my bookishness was that I had read a lot of books about other places, other places around the world. So I got very interested in languages. So I studied French, German, Latin. And then I wanted to, when I went to UBC, I wanted to do a non-European language, and I started studying Japanese. And then when I went back, after finishing at UBC the first time, I went back and joined Bank of Nova Scotia in international trade finance, worked there for 4 years, and continued my study of Japanese. Then when I went to do my doctorate, it turned out the best data on my topic were available in Japan and Korea, so I went there to do that work, which led to teaching about Japan in the business program at the University of Calgary.
So are you still fluent in any of the languages, or can you read and write them, or?
Well, I mean, fluency is always a relative concept, but I mostly right now I work on my French so that I could, I need to be, in my opinion, I want to be perfectly bilingual, which I'm not perfectly, but very close, I would say, in French, so that I can collaborate with my colleagues across the country. And so I have, for example, we had a presentation with the Quebec Firearms office where they did a presentation on outlaw motorcycle gangs. They've taken a very aggressive stance on that. And so they provided a bunch of reference hearings. Reference hearings are when somebody disagrees with the decision of the Chief Firearms Office on the revocation or refusal of a firearms license. And so I read through several hundred pages of that material in French, and then did a little bit of introduction and conclusion, thank yous, and so on in French at the thing. My German's pretty rusty. I did have extended conversation in Russian with a former Russian soldier that I ran into at one of the gun shows. He was incidentally quite anti-Putin, so a very interesting guy to talk to. And then, my Japanese gets better when I go to Japan for a while, and fades a bit when I'm away. But I do actually keep my hand in there because, besides collecting firearms, I also collect militaria, particularly Japanese militaria. And so I get people sending me things all the time to translate. Like I have this artifact, it has writing on it. What does it say? So I'm a little bit of a reference person for a lot of people who need to understand bits and pieces of pre-war written Japanese.
So are you a history buff on that stuff too, or?
Oh yeah, so quite a lot. So in fact, this past week I loaned some of my collection to the military museums in Calgary for an upcoming exhibit. They needed some material on the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-05.
Yeah.
And it's not that common to find, but I have quite a lot. So
Wow.
So I put some stuff on loan with them.
So, I guess moving to what you're in between from what you were doing as banking and your current position, what's the transition there? So how do you go from banking into Chief Firearms Officer?
Well, of course, the big step in between was that I spent 25 years at the University of Calgary. And so I was teaching business. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about universities is that, for the most part, the management of universities is done by the professors themselves. So someone is a professor, and then they need to have someone to be the chair of the area or to be an associate dean. And they look around and somebody gets the nod and does that for a couple of years and then goes back and does their professorial thing again. And so I had management experience at the bank. I had management experience from several stints as either the head of an area or as an associate dean at the university. So I had management expertise or experience at least. Expertise is perhaps pretentious, but I had some experience at it. And so I had, the job of chief firearms officer is in essence a management job. Okay, so I had management experience, I had exposure to firearms, and because I had been part of the community for quite a long time, I was very well known in the circles of people who were involved in all different aspects of the firearms community, whether that's gun shows, hunting, target shooting, whatever. And then also, I guess I have had a fair bit of experience at public speaking, so I was able to be a reasonable spokesperson for the office. And after a competition that seemed to drag on for quite a long time and involved endless questionnaires and security clearances and so on and so forth, on September 1st, I officially started the job, although I'd been working for a few days before that.
Oh, okay. So busy.
Well, busy is a very understated term for my life since I became chief firearms officer. Yes.
Especially working between two cities. Imagine that. Are you spending weeks at a time in one, or they keep you going all day, every day, back and forth?
Well, it's not back and forth the same day, thank goodness. I wouldn't get anything done. I'd be spending all day on the road. Well, what happened was originally, I guess to start at the beginning, on September 1st when we opened, we were basically starting up from scratch. And that's something I've done. I have run like campaign offices and things like that, so I'm used to starting something up from nothing, getting it up to a high pitch, and then winding it down and closing it up and moving away. Okay, so hopefully I won't be closing it down and moving it away, but the startup and getting it up to speed is something that I also have experience with. So the first few months, we were pretty much focused on getting that done, because when we took over the office, there was an office before, it was just federally run, and then we took over. Well, that was starting from scratch. There was nothing. We had furniture, but we had no computers, no software, no database access, no files, nothing.
It went from federally run to provincially, so they essentially the federal government says, okay, it's yours now. We take all of our equipment out.
Yeah. Well, they shut everything down, stripped everything bare, and then we walked in and started up from scratch.
It's quite the project.
It was quite the project, yes. Anyway, that took a lot of time, and during that period, it wasn't clear where I was going to be needed. And so initially they told me, I said, well, I'm willing to go up to Edmonton, get an apartment there. I probably can't move because I just got too much stuff. I got a husband and 2 cats and, lots of stuff. So anyway, they said, well, just go up there as needed. Well, it turned out that as needed became more and more, and eventually at the end of February, I rented an apartment very close to my office in Edmonton. And so what I typically do is most of my time actually on weekdays is spent in Edmonton. On weekends, I'm usually traveling, either at a gun show or some other kind of special event. And then in between, here and there, I'm at home. So recently, for example, I spent 18 straight days on the road. I left home, went to the Red Deer Gun Show, went from the Red Deer Gun Show up to Edmonton, spent the week in Edmonton, went up to Lloyd, as you said, on that weekend, then spent the week in Edmonton, then went to High Prairie for the gun show, drove back to Edmonton, spent over half a day, and then overnight in Edmonton.
That's quite a way.
Yes, it was. And then the next morning, came in briefly to the office and headed back home. And I do have to spend some time at home because I have a 90-year-old father with Alzheimer's, and I'm the only family member within thousands of kilometers, so I have to look after him. I took him to the dentist last week. Next week I've got to do a follow-up, take him to the dentist, and things like that. So it's a fairly full life.
So yeah, professional, personal, very busy.
Yes.
What are so you're talking about some of the gun shows that you go to? How many are you going to? Like, I don't personally know how many there are. Just kind of what you might see online. You might kind of hear about the odd one, but how many do you end up at in a given month or year?
Well, of course, I haven't been in the job for a year yet, but basically I'm trying to attend every one that I possibly can in Alberta. And that is a bit of a shifting target because most of them had to close down during COVID. During COVID, there was, I think, maybe 2 or 3.
Yes.
There'd occasionally be a brief period where public health regulations allowed it, and bang, a gun show would pop in there, and then things would shut down again. So right now, shows are opening up, where more and more of them are being announced all the time. And I've been to tiny little shows that are, 30 tables. I've been to shows that are over 400 tables. So if there's a gun show in Alberta, I intend to be at it unless I'm at another gun show in Alberta.
Great.
Or at some other event. So, for example, I'll miss at least one because there's an upcoming meeting of all the chief firearms officers from across Canada in Winnipeg.
Are these gun shows, are they well attended?
They
what
have
you might
been
consider well attended?
They have been extraordinarily well attended because for 2 years there weren't any.
Yes.
And so people have been desperate to get out to them. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that, there was a police officer from Calgary Police Service who after attending one, said, this isn't a gun show, it's a social event where people have guns.
Yes.
And this is where it's a big social event for the community. It's often the only time people get to see many of their friends that they've known for years. There's a certain group of people that tend to go around to all the gun shows as exhibitors, and another group of people who travel any place they can go to attend a gun show and hopefully find that great bargain or that missing item they need for their collection or for their, the accessory they need for their hunting rifle or whatever. So it's a big social gathering, and that's where most of my friends were. And so I really missed people, and a lot of them, unfortunately, it's a bit of an elderly demographic sometimes. So even without any other public health issues, if you miss 2 years worth of shows, a few of those people will have passed away, just because they were very elderly. And so, that's when you go back and you suddenly realize, oh, I'm not going to see that person anymore. It's, it's a sobering thing, but then you get to see all the other people that are still there, and that makes you happy.
Yeah. I imagine there's a lot of the younger generation coming up, so you get some new people interested, and those collector pieces, like you say, with the lending part of your collection to the museum. I think that's pretty cool. I think a lot of people don't realize that is a part of the gun ownership community.
Yeah, well, that's another aspect of my life, which I didn't mention because there's just so many aspects that it's hard to keep them all in. Hard for me to even keep track sometimes. I'm also the president of the Military Collectors Club Association of Canada, which is, there are people who collect firearms in that group, but it's more oriented towards people who collect militaria, which is everything from medals to books, photographs, historical items, including uniforms and things like that. So that aspect of history is a very important thing to me, and it's one of the unfortunate aspects of how we've regulated firearms in Canada is that a lot of people, a younger generation, have been cut off from their history. When I was a kid, you could go to a gun show and you could see all kinds of things, and once you were old enough, you could buy them, and then later, once you had an FAC, a firearms acquisition certificate, and then later a possession and acquisition license, you could buy them. But now there are a lot of things that people are unable to buy. And so there's a lot of historical items that have been sort of collateral damage of poorly designed federal measures that, well, if one was charitable, one could say they had good intentions, but they had a lot of collateral damage. So, for example, someone who wants to collect, do a World War II collection, very common thing. People will often want to collect, say, one rifle from each of the belligerents or one handgun from each of the belligerents. Well, the rifles there's a few that they wouldn't be able to get now, but on the handgun side, there's a lot of them that they wouldn't be able to buy. So, for example, if they wanted a Luger as representative of things that were used by the Germans, they wouldn't be able to buy one unless it had been modified or was one of the rarer models with a longer barrel. So
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, and a lot of I do have a lot of people come along because I display my collection, not just as chief firearms officer, but prior to that, it was a big part of my life. It's I have so much stuff; it's all packed away, and so often the only time I get to see my stuff, not just guns but other stuff, is when I pull it out for a show.
Yeah.
Gun show or military show, and so they see this stuff and they say, "Wow, that's really cool," but they can't buy it.
So when you go to one of these gun shows, how many pieces do you bring? Like, are you bringing a dump truck?
Well, my normal car is quite an old car, but it's a station wagon and it's quite spacious inside.
There you go.
So,
Okay.
So I will typically bring enough stuff to. Previously, I would bring enough stuff to fill 4 8-foot tables, which is 32 feet, and I've hand-built display cases that I put stuff in because I'm quite a fanatic about safe storage, both for a public safety standpoint and also because I don't want somebody who's just had some greasy, salty French fries handling my stuff. It would typically range. Some displays that I've done had no firearms at all because they were a display of non-firearms militaria, flags or maps or things like that. Some of them would have primarily guns. They might have probably if I were to choose a number, 2 dozen maybe, 20 to 25. The display that I do quite commonly as Chief Firearms Officer is intended to show how complicated and in many ways inconsistent our firearms classification scheme is. And I usually have about 2 dozen items in that display, a few of which show my family's firearms history because they're things that belong to my father, and others that show different aspects of, well, this is classified this way, and this is classified that way, and this is why it's classified that way. And then people can draw their own conclusions about how rational that system is.
Is there a piece of the collection, whether it's firearm or uniform or whatever it might be, that is the most valuable to you?
Well, it's hard to say because there's I have a lot of different kinds of things, but there's one item that is quite unique that has a lot of family history to it, and it's one of probably the first military item I ever got, and it is a 50 caliber Browning machine gun cartridge that's been deactivated, and then it's had 2 locket-size holes cut in the side, and photographs of my great-grandparents mounted in there.
Oh, okay.
And I got this when I was a kid, and I didn't know where it came from. I later discovered it was from my great-uncle, who had been an anti-aircraft gunner, and he had made these things and distributed them to various members of the family.
He made them himself?
Yes.
And it's only within the family?
Yeah.
So a real collector's piece.
Yes. So, that is particularly important because for a long time, those were the only pictures I'd ever seen of my great-grandparents, were these 2 little locket-sized photos in a machine gun cartridge.
That's an interesting display.
Yeah,
So,
well, I always, I have over the years, people have come to know me at gun shows, and so I do have a certain dedicated following of people who are always keen to see what Teri's going to pull out of the closet next.
well, no, it's certainly interesting. Sounds like you're busy. A very interesting life you lead. If we're going to move into kind of your current role as the
Right.
CFO, can you kind of give us a breakdown of what does the provincial CFO do?
Okay, well, so there's two ways of answering that question. So I'll talk about the office first and then about me personally. So the office is basically licensing. So we're not law enforcement, we're a regulatory sort of group. We issue licenses, and our licensing is broadly speaking in three areas: individual, business, and ranges. Okay? So almost everything related to businesses and ranges is done through our office here in Alberta. The individual stuff, like that's, for example, possession and acquisition licenses. The individual stuff is mostly done through a central processing service in Miramichi, New Brunswick. And then a small portion of those cases get referred to us because they require some degree of investigation. And so, for example, someone might have had some involvement with the police at some point in their life, and then it's up to our office to decide, is that something that's serious enough to disqualify them from firearms ownership? And so if it's something minor from long, long ago, it probably won't be a problem. If it's something major or recent, then it probably is a problem.
Okay.
So, and we have the people that we have to make those kind of decisions. Actually, many of them are former police officers themselves. Others are former conservation officers or corrections officers, people who have had to have discussions with people and decide whether the person is a risk. So right now, the vast majority of individual transactions are done through Miramichi, but there are a lot of issues, internal administrative issues in that process, and I'm hoping that we will be able to bring that back and do it in Alberta, because I would feel much better about being able to ensure public safety and customer service if I had actual control of that, as opposed to it being done by people that I've never met, didn't choose, and live far, far away. Then, as far as my job itself, I have a mandate letter from the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General, and it's fairly detailed, but broadly speaking, I have two roles. One of those roles is to supervise the administration of this licensing office, as I've described to you, within the framework of the law as it exists right now. And fortunately, I have a deputy, very capable deputy, who deals with most of that kind of stuff. And we discuss some policy issues and interesting cases, and there are a few things, because of technicalities in the law, that I'm not able to delegate that I do personally. So that's one aspect of my job, is the system as it is now. The other aspect is, in some ways, the most exciting part of that job. Although, believe it or not, sometimes deciding those other issues can be pretty exciting in itself. But the part that offers kind of the most creative potential is that I'm supposed to advocate for laws that make more sense. And I believe that firearms regulation is an area that has tremendous potential for having an effect on public safety, but that effect is not always fully realized because of poorly designed systems and poorly managed or implemented systems. And so I'm always looking for ways that we can improve the management of the system as it exists now, and then also improve the system, because I think that there's a lot of emphasis on the wrong things, so that resources are often directed towards purposes that have minimal effect on public safety, and therefore there's not enough to put onto the things that do have a direct impact on public safety.
So there's a good segue, I guess. There was one part, so this is from a letter that you wrote, and I thought this was actually a really good piece, because I think it's what people look for in the politicking side of things, where people can have a civil disagreement. So whether it's liberals versus conservatives or just people in general can't get along. But if you disagree with something, give your reasons for why, but you go further and you offer some actual solutions, concrete details of, okay, I don't think this is going to work. How about we take this money and do A, B, and C? So if I can read a little part of this letter. So this was a letter you wrote to Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendicino, if I'm saying that right. So this was dated April 14th, 2022. So this here says, the vast resources that will be required to implement these plans, so talking about buybacks, confiscation of firearms, would have a much better return elsewhere if your goal is safer communities for everyone. Such alternative measures would include better identification, tracking, and prosecution of firearms traffickers, providing effective deterrence to those who misuse firearms, offering alternatives to the destructive gang lifestyle, and addressing the drug addiction that is destroying so many young lives. So it continues on, even if the cost of implementing the ban can be constrained to just $2 billion, this sum alone could pay for some 12,000 person years of specialized law enforcement, regulatory, and social services personnel. So I thought the very end of that was actually spot on. It's almost what the federal government has been talking about when we have the defunding of police, even at local governments. So we're talking about defunding of police. This is saying like, hey, we're willing to take some of that money and put it into social services. Why aren't we looking at these options? But when it comes to firearms, it's almost just a one size fits all approach. Get rid of the guns, and that's it. But you offer, several different paths that we can put this money into, and I would agree these are a lot of different ideas that have a lot of merit to them. So.
Well, I think one of the important things, so, you mentioned about people have different disagreements on things. So I always like to try and work to bring people together. And I think the way you look to bring people together is you find something that they can agree on. It's always easy to find things you can disagree on with other people, but find something that you can agree on. And the firearms issue, I think, has a great deal of potential for that, because when you talk even about the firearms issue, it's not one issue. It's a whole bunch of different issues. Misuse of firearms could be suicides. It could be domestic violence. It could be gang usage. It could be improper storage and accidents. There's many, many different aspects to this. And so what you need to do when you approach a complex problem is not try to, use a one-size-fits-all solution, but figure out this big issue. What are the sub-problems within that? And then what can we do about each of those sub-problems? And then when you approach the stakeholders on a particular issue, then you can find room to agree with those people on that sub-issue. And so I have a lot of friends who range from across the political spectrum. And although they know my political leanings and might not agree with them, many of them say that they have confidence in me because they know that I'm trying to find an actual practical, pragmatic solution to a problem, not simply apply sort of one ideological approach to it. And in the case of these firearms issues, you mentioned defunding the police, and I don't agree with the idea of defunding the police. I mean, there may be certain things that it's not that the police are perfect. I don't think there's any organization, group, or whatever that is perfect in the world, including me and including my office. But there are aspects of policing that I feel desperately need more funding. I've spoken to people who, I consult widely with law enforcement, and I've spoken to people who say, we should have 8 people. We've got 4, and actually at the moment only 2, and and then our funding is going to run out soon, and so on. So there are aspects of policing that need increased funding, but it's not only policing that's going to solve this kind of a problem. We need education to help further reduce accidents. It's not widely known, but firearms accidents have been reduced enormously over the years through education and requirements for better storage and things like that. So you can approach some problems through education. Some of them may need a sort of social work type of approach. Some may need, better enforcement at the border. Some may need more people, more police, which doesn't always necessarily have to mean, just arresting people. My conversations with your Sergeant Ferry were very interesting, and I've heard some of his presentations as well. And the idea of just trying to get people away from lifestyles that are going to be bad for not just the community, but for them personally, and making them understand that, if you go down this path, you're going to end up dead. So, it's in your own interest to go a different way. So the idea of policing as just a bunch of guys with billy clubs going out and banging on heads, that's not the reality today, and it's even less likely to be the reality tomorrow, because policing and police officers, for anyone who gets to know them, are a much more sophisticated lot than that.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. Nobody's perfect. I think everybody's trying to do the best they can. It's just interesting when a lot of stuff that comes up around firearms seems like the current powers that be are just pushing one thing and one thing only, not necessarily willing to listen to suggestions, other solutions, alternatives. So,
well, the interesting thing about that is, I thought I knew a lot about this issue before I started the job, but I've learned an awful lot more since that time. And one of the things that's quite surprising that most people don't know is that even there are certain aspects of what we do right now that I strongly agree with. So, for example, having people properly screened and trained before they get, the ability to legally acquire a firearm, that I'm solidly behind. But what people often don't realize is that the federal government isn't so much behind that. That's their program, but they seriously underfund it. I've spoken to chief firearms officers all across the country, and all of them say they don't have enough resources to screen people as much as they would like, to do as much follow-up on cases as they would like. And so it's almost like they've set up a program and then set it up to fail so that then they can justify other measures. Now, that might be attributing a little bit more malevolence, than is appropriate, but it's quite startling that the things that they set up themselves, they're not doing properly.
Could they underfund it maybe they underfund it because they figure, well, then we just won't get as many PALs out there, and then we just have less firearms, rather than we're just going to have people doing a bad job because we underfund it?
Well, they probably end up with somewhat of both. And I'm not saying that firearms officers across the country are doing a bad job. They're doing the best job they can, just like police officers do the best job that they can, given the resources they have. But sometimes a little bit more in terms of resources can make a big improvement. And, you're able to do that if you're a police officer, that one extra patrol that might catch somebody or deter somebody. Or if you're a firearms officer, you can ask those few extra questions that might reveal something that might determine the outcome of a case. So I think part of the resources that are currently planned to be, in my mind, wasted on some government programs that are not really going to help very much would be much better spent on just implementing the program that they have now. I mean, when chief firearms officers across the country, including my predecessor, I can't say that I mean, I didn't speak personally to my predecessor, but my understanding is that it was a long-standing issue in the office that it was underfunded. And and I know that offices across the country have that issue now. And so if we could do a better job of screening people, then, and follow up and things like that, then, and more inspections of businesses and so on, I think that would have more of an impact on safety than taking somebody's firearm out and giving them some money that they'll probably use to go out and buy another firearm. So, you're not really going to accomplish very much with this confiscation and compensation scheme.
So where do you see firearms fitting in society in general? Like, what is their purpose? And, well, I guess, should people have them recreationally? I would imagine I know your answer, but just so you can kind of put it all together.
Yeah, well, I think that people's exposure to firearms varies very widely, and as a result, they have very different opinions on them. And I think one can draw a very reasonable analogy to automobiles. So there are people who view automobiles as an instrument of freedom that enables them to explore the country and gives them opportunities to do things they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And there are people who view automobiles as, well, they are sources of pollution and people shouldn't have them because it's, there are traffic accidents and environmental impacts and so on and so forth. So how people have been socialized through their experiences with things determines how they view those things. And so, for example, here in Alberta, the traditional culture that was largely based on rural extractive industries and agriculture, if you were a rancher, a firearm was a tool, enabled you to defend your cattle against predators. If you were a farmer, maybe you could control the pesky gophers that were causing your livestock to break their legs. They were practical implements. And they were implements that enabled you to live a certain free lifestyle that people often seek out in rural areas. A lot of people want to live in a rural area because it gives that space gives them the sense of freedom and running their own business, whether it's a ranch or a farm or something else, gives them that sense of freedom. So the firearms then have the association with freedom, responsibility, looking after yourself. So they have all those kind of positive connotations. But of course now, a lot of people are quite far removed from that culture. They may only have lived in the cities. They may have come to Canada from a country where there was no tradition of civilian firearms ownership, and the only guns they saw were in people who oppressed them, in the hands of people who oppressed them. And so they have quite a different set of associations. The item itself is neutral. The item itself doesn't do anything until somebody does something with it. And so, what you have seen people do with it determines how you will view that item. And so, in our rural areas today, people still have that association that firearms are tools, they are useful, they are elements of important and indeed essential elements of a free and independent lifestyle. And then you also have people who have a very different set of associations with those things.
Well, I think even on that too, you were talking about how you go to a gun show and it's a social aspect and people can get together and talk about these things, right? It's a show where people have guns, but just like you might have a car show,
exactly,
it brings people together.
My husband is a car nut, and so He just recently bought a 1965 Morris Minor to add to the other two Morris Minors and several other vehicles that he has. So, he's not a gun person at all, but he immediately saw the parallels between these two worlds. And in fact, there's a fair amount of overlap.
So that's kind of coming from the provincial view of things. So for the federal government, can you give us a bit of insight into outside what we might see on mainstream media, what did they actually think about firearms? Because I didn't know the stuff you were saying about the licensing office and maybe underfunding those programs and stuff. So they're talking about buybacks. They've put over 1,500 guns on that new ban. Now they recently extended that buyback, that grace period where they're looking to do that. What is their actual view on this, as far as you might understand it?
It's very hard to get inside someone else's head when a lot of the things that they do simply don't make sense. And so I think that to a certain extent, they started down a path that sounded good to start with, and they've gone down that path, the less good it looks, but they're kind of stuck on that path. So,
like throwing good money after bad.
Yeah, well,
for an analogy.
Yeah, exactly. So they may have thought, and there are people who legitimately believe that certain firearms are intrinsically evil. Okay, they don't realize that one firearm is a fairly good substitute for another for most purposes. Not for most purposes, but for most malevolent purposes. So if you want to do something wrong, if you can't get one kind of gun, another one will probably do quite well. It's not necessarily the case if you're out hunting a particular type of game or something like that. Then you need something more specialized, which is why people have often numerous firearms. But I think they probably legitimately thought this was something they needed to do, and then they don't get good advice and what good advice they do get, they don't listen to, because I think there's been an unfortunate level of polarization on this issue, where if you say anything that opposes a particular federal government measure, then you want to have the Wild West. Nobody wants to have the Wild West. Okay, firearms owners are the most concerned people you will ever meet about public safety, because they could be a victim of lack of public safety just the same as anybody else. But also, when there's a perceived lack of public safety, that's what motivates measures that unfairly target them, measures of which they are the collateral damage. And so,
even if you think lots of police officers are firearms owners, I'm a firearm owner, but I'm out there also going after the people that have firearms illegally. So,
yeah, well, I think in my mind, the most important thing is we have to recognize that there are not good guns and bad guns. There are, I'll say it this way and then qualify it. I mean, there's good people and bad people. And bad people won't necessarily always be bad people, but they're the wrong people to have guns right at the moment.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, there are people who turn their lives around, and, someone might have been a gang member when they were young, and 20 years later, they've become an upstanding citizen, they moved to the country, and they want to go hunt deer. Well, maybe that's time to reconsider that. But, there are definitely people that we don't want to have firearms in society, at least at present, given their current record. And we need to try and keep those firearms away from those people. And it doesn't matter whether that firearm is, a modern firearm or an old single-shot firearm. They shouldn't have a firearm at all. The way to deal with these issues is to make sure that the people who should not have firearms, who would be a bad person to have a firearm, that they don't get them. of any kind, at least not legally. And then, the legal aspect is all that I can, directly deal with. Our office does collaborate to some extent with firearms trafficking efforts through provision of information and things like that. But that's primarily a police role or a border services role.
Well, and I think you offer a lot of good ideas on, we deal with both sides of the issue. So we deal with the item itself, and then more importantly, we deal with the person. I think dealing with the person obviously a lot harder of a discussion because a firearm itself doesn't have rights, but a person does. So there's a lot more discussion to be had about how you're going to deal with that person, what type of, whether it's charges, mandatory minimum punishments, and then just further through Firearms Act or criminal code, depending on what type of offense you're looking at.
I think you really need to look, in detail. People like to make broad, sweeping statements, but they will immediately draw a comparison, Canada and U.S. and make all kinds of I think often unfounded generalizations about that. But you can look at some of the countries that have very high homicide rates, far higher than the United States, and some of them, they don't have any legal firearms ownership at all. And so one of the things that being an academic for 25 years taught me is how to look at studies and see what they actually say, which is often quite different from what they're portrayed as saying.
Yes.
And so, and I also know that through the judicious choice of your samples, and in other words, the particular objects that you're going to study, particular locations or individuals that you're going to study, and then the methodologies that you apply, you can predetermine the result that you want. And unfortunately, that's the pattern in a lot of I'll use scare quotes, the research that one often sees, especially cited in the media, because the media are not particularly good at that. In fact, they often are among the worst offenders. They'll say, for example, there was a recent poll that was about whether people wanted tougher gun laws, but they didn't say what tougher gun laws means. Does that mean longer sentences for offenders, or does it mean more paperwork for a hunter? It leaves that completely open.
And that's part of the purpose of this podcast, is to have that more in-depth discussion and have people take, kind of sit back and think more about what they're reading, what they're actually looking at. It's, I think the world's kind of moved, especially with the social media side of things, they've moved more into just reading the headline, maybe the first two sentences. If that's not going to catch them or draw them in, then they're on to the next thing. This is a much broader discussion. It affects hundreds of thousands of people, and I don't think an honest discussion has been had, at least not in the morning news or social media, or if anybody actually watches whatever the government's saying, in the House. So I thought having you here that's why having you here is beneficial for this conversation. So one question I did want to have, and won't keep you too much longer, the federal buyback program. Can you explain at all any details of how, like I know they've paused it, but how would that actually work? And is there any idea of what would happen with people who don't want to give their guns back?
Well, so I can't say very much because there is no plan that has been announced, at least. There is no plan that has been publicly announced. There has been no plan that has been shared with our offices. We, in general, do not get any advance notice of things. The recent May 18th measures, we found out about by accident a few days ahead of time and got mere single-digit days
I think it was on the, well, at least for my purposes, I saw on May 11th, people started talking about this.
Yeah.
Small businesses were really affected. Now all of a sudden they have to come up with a whole record-keeping system in a week, and a new process for verifying a license. And it's like, well, where are we getting the money for this? Who's accountable for what? And as of May 18th, if I don't, do steps A, B, and C, am I liable? Is my business liable? So yeah, that's definitely scary.
Now there's generally a lack of consultation, but on those kinds of issues, and we have got a lot of inquiries from people who are, the simple cases. That was, you didn't need a lot of notice. You didn't need a lot of figuring out. But the world isn't always simple. There's a lot of complicated cases. What happens if this? What happens if that? Those questions could have all been avoided if they'd had more prior announcement and more giving people more opportunity to have input, to explain how some of these things might affect them, and then even if they decided to pursue it, to be able to adjust the measures, or at least come up with explanations. On the buyback, there is no system that has been announced as far as we've been able to determine. If people were to retain their property in spite of a federal law requiring that it be surrendered or deactivated, they would be technically in violation of the law and would be potentially exposing themselves to the consequences of violating the Firearms Act, or the Criminal Code, or some combination thereof. And so it is a very serious matter, because it's something that strikes very deeply at a lot of people who are torn between their instinct to always obey the law, even when it doesn't make sense, and the consequences of both monetary and in some cases sentimental and other consequences of having their property taken away. So
the legally acquired.
Yes. Property that they legally acquired, that they, in many cases, were specifically authorized to acquire. It will be a very wrenching time for people, and my hope is that the complications of this will eventually either cause the decision to be reconsidered, or if not reconsidered by the current administration, then perhaps by a future administration of a different complexion. And so, but right now, if I had a crystal ball and I could tell you exactly what was going to happen and how it was going to work, I'd love to do it and share it with all of your listeners, but they didn't issue me one. They didn't issue me, I'm still looking. Maybe that was one of the things the feds took with us. They didn't leave me the magic wand to solve some of these problems, and they didn't leave me with the crystal ball to figure out what the federal government might have in store for us.
So right now we're kind of in a wait-and-see approach. Do you know why they picked 2023 as the extension date?
I do not know. I know that they needed to have things a little ways off. Personally, I don't think that they will have a plan, concrete. Well, they might have the rudiments of a plan by that point, but they certainly would not have time to implement anything by that time. I don't think there's any realistic prospect that they could both come up with a plan and implement it by that time. So I think the most likely consequence most likely outcome is that they will end up having to extend the amnesty again. And,
really? Okay.
That if I were a betting person, hopefully that's not illegal to say, then I would probably bet that way.
Yes.
But with additional time, hopefully it will be reconsidered. I can't see that they would be able to do it. So they will have to. I don't see any alternative but for them to extend it. And there is, if you look back at the history, one of the few benefits of being old like me is that you have seen how some similar ideas have worked out, and there have been regulations that have been repeatedly delayed, in some cases for many years. And so this might end up being one of those things that eventually, it'll end up being delayed and delayed and delayed, and then either someone will finally see the light and cancel it and decide, there's a much better way of spending all the money that we were going to spend on that, or, if they delay it long enough, eventually everybody dies and it goes to, and the problem solves itself over a matter of decades, just through natural mortality. I wish I had a better solution, a better answer for you.
No, I mean, tell us what you can. I appreciate that. Maybe the last thing I'll kind of ask, and I don't know if you saw the recent news. There's mass shooting in the U.S. yesterday, and they seem to be having a few of them lately. And depending how you classify mass shooting, that also differs on the source you look at. But do you have any kind of argument for when people use that as an excuse, or maybe I won't say excuse, but a reason for why there should just be no guns?
Well, the first thing that one should always say in cases like this is to extend condolences to all of the parties involved, because any tragedy that takes many lives, including in this case a large number of very young lives, is something that we all have to deplore and extend every way of supporting the individuals who are affected. It also, of course, has a very traumatic effect, I think, on people even beyond those families that lost loved ones. So, because it raises the fear level, people wonder, how do I keep my children safe? So, my answer to people is that we need to ensure that people who are either mentally ill or have extremist views that they somehow feel are going to be furthered by taking hateful, cowardly actions like this. We need to ensure that those people do not have legal access to any kind of firearms. And so that's what our focus is in our office, is ensuring that people who have access to any kind of a firearm are vetted as carefully as we can to ensure that they don't slip through the cracks. And I always want to ensure that everyone understands that my team and I are working as hard as we can to ensure that no families will ever face these kind of tragic losses.
And I mean, and it kind of speaks to your point there about comparing Canada to the U.S. We have differences in our gun laws. We have different culture around it. So, yeah, I would agree with what you're saying. Is there anything else you think you'd like to add, or do we miss any other parts to this conversation?
Well, I'm sure that you're an interesting conversationalist, and we could continue on here for many days. But hopefully, what we can do perhaps is at some point when you have run through another bunch of interesting guests and you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, you can come around and talk to me again. And I'd very much enjoy a future conversation with you and your listeners.
Oh, great. Thanks. Is there any way that anything you want to plug for like a show or any way that people can connect with you or get in touch?
Well, the best way to reach us is that we have a very easy to remember email, and that is albertacfo@gov.ab.ca, the usual Government of Alberta extension. So albertacfo@gov.ab.ca.
And only send letters saying thanks for doing a great job.
Well, we believe it or not, we actually do get some like that, but whatever kinds of, we appreciate all the feedback that we get, because that's what's going to enable us to do a better job in future. Sometimes people point out issues that we weren't aware of, complications, and as I mentioned before, I don't consider, as good as my team is and as hard as we work, neither I nor they are perfect, and so all feedback is welcome.
Great. Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming by today, and we'll definitely look to have you on again.
Okay, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.